another episode of Paranormal, the New Normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, here to try and make the world seem a little more normal. Are we going to accomplish that tonight? Maybe. But as always, I have a guest to help me do that. My guest tonight, and I apologize in advance if I butcher his last name because yikes. But my guest tonight is Brandon Schexnayder.
That's pretty good, Jeremy. Thank you. It's Schexnayder. You're right.
Hey, I did it. You got to remember the A is silent. But, kind of. But, how you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, man. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you on. I took a look at your podcast, and it seems very interesting, and we're definitely going to get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But, as always, there are two questions I ask every guest in this show. The first being, what got you into the paranormal, supernatural, spiritual world?
Right. Well, I grew up in New Orleans, so it was almost just, by way of being down there for sure. But honestly, what got me into it the most is, growing up down there, I had parents who were just avid genealogists, right? And this was back before the internet, back before ancestry.com, back before you could do research online, right? So what they did is they drug their kids to cemeteries up and down the Mississippi River all the time to take pictures, to get on. So I pretty much had a childhood in cemeteries. You combine that with some of those New Orleans legends, man, and I couldn't not be into it in some way, shape, or form. I feel like it was a pretty good melting pot there,
Yeah. New Orleans is a very, very hard spot not to become a lover of the supernatural in, because it's just such a rich history of that French, Haitian voodoo culture that just inspired that area.
And it's got everything. Yeah,
everything, literally. Which we'll get to some of that later, because that leads me to some questions. But
sure.
But did you have any actual paranormal experiences living there? As I'm sure you had to have. I mean,
I haven't, though. That's the thing, is I have spent all this time searching for a paranormal experience. Now, I mean, I have a couple things that I feel like are very serendipitous and very much the type of thing that I feel like somebody's looking out for us type thing. But man, I've been everywhere. I have been everywhere in search of a paranormal experience. Man, I was just in Waverly Hills sanitarium about 2 months ago, right before Christmas. Went and spent the night out there. I was there from midnight to 6 a.m. in the cold. It's supposed to be like one of the most haunted places. I'm supposed to see a shadow person, and went completely hoping to have an experience and didn't at Waverly Hills, and I've done all these different things like that and tried all these places. And I still yet have ever had the opportunity to have one on a personal level like that. However, I do tell people, I do feel like, that there are, I'm a storyteller. That's what my podcast is. It's what I like to do is, a storyteller. I do haunted tourism as a ghost tour guide, in the current town where I live in Tennessee. And, I kind of feel like in a lot of ways, sometimes when I tell folks stories, good things happen, right? It becomes this kind of, I say serendipitous, but I think they're looking out for us, and there's this one particular story that we started telling about, when we first started the podcast. It's been almost 5 years. We started telling the story of this woman named Julia Brown who lived right outside of New Orleans in this town. It was called the City of Frenier. And she supposedly was a voodoo practitioner, and she lived out in the swamp outside of town in this little logging community out there. And we started telling her story because we learned it growing up, and it hadn't been told a lot. And the few places it had been told, it made her seem evil. Okay. And here's the gist of the story is they say that she's a voodoo practitioner, and she lived out in this little swamp community. And she was kind of the midwife for this community. It's a very isolated community. You can only get to it by boat or by train. She was like the midwife, the healer, did all these things, was a person in the community that was very helpful to people. And at some point, she supposedly just her relationship went sour with this community. She felt like she was being taken advantage of, and it started going sour. And folks around town, they say that she started to isolate herself at her house, and people would go by and they would see her cabin out there, and she'd be rocking on the front porch of her cabin singing this song, "When I die, I'm going to take the whole town with you." All right. And basically this foreboding, ominous thing, right? When I die, I'm going to take the whole town with me. And Sure enough, she passes away. She was older at that point in time. I want to say she was somewhere around 65 to 75. So I'm not sure why she passed away. This was back in 1915. She passes away. 2 days later, they're having her funeral. And all of a sudden, this enormous hurricane comes through. All right. This is the largest recorded hurricane prior to named hurricanes, as we now have, right? So it was called the Great Hurricane of the Indies back in 1915. 500 people died in Southeast Louisiana this day while her funeral is going on. And the town of Frenier is utterly decimated, just absolutely destroyed. That town's destroyed. People are drowning out there from the storm surge. It's a total incident. It's all documented. It's all happened. We have Julia Brown on census records, the hurricane. We've got everything, right? All this research on her. But she became this evil voodoo practitioner after that. And some TV shows started showing her as, this evil voodoo curse, right? And this is who she was. So we became really interested in this woman because she lives out there. This is close to where we grew up. Very interested in Julia. And we decided to start doing research on her. And the more we told her story and the more we found out about her as a person, we found these firsthand accounts of a woman who grew up down there and actually knew her and had met her, and talking about how this woman was a beloved member of the community. And if she was practicing voodoo, if anything, she was warning the community. And we've just seen how this tale has warped to where not understanding this person that was an integral part of this community, who was a beloved member of this community, has kind of become villainized in more modern interpretations of the story. And anyway, to get to the point of, have I experienced the paranormal or not? Every time I tell this story, every time we've written about her, published in a journal, the podcast, anything, something incredible always happens. Okay. For instance, my sister lives down in New Orleans still at this point in time. She works at the Louisiana State Museum, and she had just gotten published in a journal, and she wrote about Julia Brown in this paranormal journal. It was called The Feminine Macabre. It was all female authors in the paranormal. And my sister had just gotten published in this journal, and it just came out, and it just so happened to be hurricane season. Well, sure enough, a hurricane came through New Orleans. I mean, not but a week after she gets published. She stays home. It wasn't so bad. The hurricane goes through. She kind of sits through the hurricane. She goes out in her backyard the next day, and this giant tree branch, I mean, it must have been like that thick around, right? Was about a foot away from her bedroom, had fallen from this big oak tree, So, we like to say, Julia's watching out for us, right? And just we've had so many kind of eerie occurrences with Julia, in that it just, we feel like some of these folks whose story we're trying to tell in a very honest light, kind of, looking out for us at times. So do I believe it? Absolutely. Have I experienced a ghost per se? I haven't yet.
Well,
I'm going to say yet.
A couple things.
Yeah.
One, folks, this is why I cut down the big ass tree in the back of my house, because I was scared of that exact same thing happening.
Yeah.
Because it's right next to my bedroom, and with my luck, it would have landed right on me. Second thing, well, the funny thing is, I've heard that story before. I didn't know her name off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I've heard that story before. I know I had to have.
Yeah, it's been on a couple TV shows. It was on the Weather Channel. Or the Weather Channel had something called American Supernatural about 10 years ago, and she was an evil practitioner then. And a more recent show, Atlas of Cursed Places, which I believe is on Disney's streaming network now.
I've never heard of that.
Her.
I've never heard of that show. I'll have to check that one out, definitely. But anything Disney does is usually done great. But I love that you are big bad wolfing her, kind of like, how they put out a book like about the story from the Three Little Pigs from Big Bad Wolf's side.
Mm-hmm. No, I haven't heard that. No.
Oh man, they used to read that to us when we were kids. Like,
you mean the story, The Big Bad Wolf?
Well, they put out like a Three Little Pigs new version, but it's from the perspective of the Big Bad Wolf.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Sure, yeah.
So it makes him look like I'm just this dude going next door trying to find some eggs to make my whatever the hell he's making, pancakes or whatever, and like it basically de-villainizes it, makes like the pigs look like the villains in it because they're trying to hurt him for no reason. Like it's so. I mean, I like that that's what you're doing with Julia, because it makes it, because she probably was, if anything, like a white witch, I mean, she probably just the same as a lot of Wiccans are today, just white witches who are trying to make their lives better and maybe some of their friends.
But
But
she was a real person. She's a real person. She, lived down there with her kids and everything. This was her home. This was absolutely her home down there. So, yeah.
I mean, in those type of neighborhoods in the South, I mean, it's just you do one wrong thing and the gossip gets around and you're labeled as a bad person. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just the South; it's freaking everywhere in the United States. But it's just that's all it takes is one bad thing you do, and everybody finds out about it. Even before social media was a thing, for God's sake. But so I mean, well, and it's funny because you're like me. Until I moved into the house I live in now, my first house I bought, I never had any experiences either with anything. Like I was always one of those ones like you who wanted to see something, but they say those who want to see don't see. Like that's the thing I always was told as I was growing up. If you want to see these type of things, you're not gonna see them. It's the people who don't want to see them that end up getting are the ones who will see them.
Yeah.
But the house I live in now, as my listeners know, is haunted. I actually posted a video on TikTok and Facebook a couple last week, I think it was, of in my garage we caught a ghost light or orb floating around, and like I had a couple people, my friends, being like, "Oh, that's a bug." I'm like, "It's not no damn bug. You look at that thing going towards the camera. It is a ball of light. It is not a bug. There's no wings. It's not moving that fast at that point. You can see the shape of it. I mean, it's weird. And the sound that I mean, I don't know if it's wind getting through somewhere in there, like, but the sound in the background is creepy as hell too. And that's why I don't go in my garage at night by myself. But because the original owner of this house is still living here, and apparently, from the feelings my wife gets, he doesn't like us much.
Yeah.
I mean, he killed our chickens, for God's sake. He killed a lot of our chickens.
Oh,
We had our chickens in the back of the garage, and it's basically set up as like a coop almost. I mean, all we had to do was put a door on it so the chickens can't get out, and it's set up like a coop. But when they were in there, we had a bunch of chickens. Just all of a sudden, they'd be flattened, and we didn't find them all even until we cleaned it out. After I spent 2 days cleaning out the freaking shreddings in there, and I would find like chicken carcasses like underneath shreddings buried, and the other chickens must have buried it or something. But and now they're in the shed, and none of them are dying amazingly. So he didn't like them in the garage because as the paranormal investigators I had come to my house tell me, he doesn't think chickens belong in the house because they're wild animals. Even though they weren't in the house, they were in the garage, but still. That was apparently his zone where he worked on his antique car and everything. So he exacted his revenge on our damn birds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's all good now, and he leaves us alone. I've had a couple mediums like tell me exactly on my show, like be like, "Yeah, I sense his presence, like in the room with you or in the garage. Like I sense him from this far away. I can sense him, like on the other side of the country." And I'm working with a couple people to try to get him cleaned out of the house because I want him to move on. I want him to be happy in the afterlife and move on.
Totally.
Go meet your wife in heaven or whatever you believe is after this. Go there, like leave my house alone. The house is creepy with you in it. So, and you set my dogs off constantly. So, but so yeah, your podcast, Southern Gothic. Now, I wasn't sure if it was just a paranormal podcast or if you guys like touch on everything like Southern.
I mean, it's anything that's kind of dark history and haunted. It's mostly I tell ghost stories, the majority of it. Nice. Ghost stories. There's some old mysteries in there, some things like that, some old legends. Every now and then we'll get a little cryptid in there, something like that. But yeah.
Well, I was gonna say it's the damn South. You better get some cryptids in there. And have you guys done Robert Johnson?
No, I'm scared to do Robert Johnson.
Really?
I feel like the man deserves a very good, he deserves a lot of respect and a lot of work. And, it's such a big story. It's somebody that I just, I've always been kind of chicken that I wouldn't do a good enough justice to Robert, It's somebody I grew up on. I was in music for a long time. And so, Robert Johnson's just, that's a big deal for what I came up from. So, yeah.
Oh, true. That's right. Because I did want to get you my music podcast as well, but because your profile seemed like you'd fit both. But yeah, well, the reason I thought of Robert Johnson right away is because we just did a urban legends bracket on this show that
Hmm.
released a couple weeks ago, and he was one of the urban legends on it. That
Yeah,
whole did he really sell like the idea of did he sell his soul to the devil for music talent,
yeah.
which I don't know. I honestly never knew in my life. Which I've heard that story since I was a kid, but I never knew what side I believed in it. Like, did he really, or did he just practice and get good?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I could find that crossroads. I'd certainly do it.
Uh, I mean, if I can meet the
Consider,
devil,
put it
if I
that
can
way.
meet if I can meet the devil at the crossroads, there's a lot of things I might ask for. But put it that way. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in his life I would ask for if I had the chance for my soul. But I would also ask for another 100 years of my life before he takes it. Just saying. Looking at you, Big Red. But you're from New Orleans, so I gotta ask: Did you
Uh-huh.
grow up? Did you grow up hearing the legends of the Rougarou?
Oh, the Rougarou. Yeah, yeah. We totally grew up on the Rougarou. I mean, that's what I mean. I grew up in the city, so it wasn't something that we're out in the middle of nowhere. But I mean, total the Rougarou. They have as a kid the Audubon Zoo, right? We have our big zoo down there, and your parents or grandparents and all take you to the zoo. And of course, there's a swamp exhibit at the zoo where there's all the alligators and stuff. And in the zoo, they actually have a big mock-up of the Rougarou. So every child in New Orleans, whether or not you have parents who grew up there hearing about the Rougarou or not, has seen this image of the Rougarou. So oh yeah, we have absolutely grew up on the Rougarou for sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Rougarou, or as it's more commonly known in the rest of America, the Dogman, is a worldwide phenomena that a lot of people believe in, and I've actually had D.A. Roberts from the North American Dogman Patrol. I forget NADP. I think it's Patrol, but I've had him on the show, and like he actually goes out looking in Michigan and that area for like dogmen, and there there are some scary stories he told about them, and I mean I don't know. Do you think it's a possibility that dogmen exist? Like, do you think it's
I
something that
mean,
could exist?
I always thought of the Rougarou more as a werewolf vibe than the Dogman. I always thought that I thought he came more from like the French, the Lebet, the beast out there. That's kind of how I always grew up hearing about it. He's more of a shapeshifter. The whole concept or idea is, there's one of two ways that you become a Rougarou, right? It could just be that you broke your Lenten promises, okay, because it's a Catholic piece of folklore there
Yeah,
that, or of course you get bit by it. You get bit by another Rougarou, and then you come out. So I always heard of it more of the werewolf vibe, but there's there's so many different ones down there too that kind of all are in that same vein. We also have like the Honey Island Swamp Monster down there, which is
well,
right
the,
down the Gulf Coast, and
yeah,
that's like, I mean, some people say it's like half alligator, half man, or there's like 20 different interpretations of that one for sure. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, well, see, that's the thing. It's when it comes to dogmen, like I literally hate the word werewolf because, like, to
Uh-huh.
me, it's like someone took real encounters of dogmen and turned it into a Hollywood thing where, oh, it changes on the full moon and
Right.
silver bullets can kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people straight up tell me like that live dogmen and breed dogmen, like you can shoot a silver bullet at a dogman all you want. You're just gonna piss it off and you're gonna die faster.
Yeah. Well, the Honey Island Swamp Monster, I mean, that's considered to be an outright cryptid that way. But I mean, all the Rougarou folklore is like shapeshifter, you know.
Well, I
Um,
mean, it makes me think because you're the first person to tell me that, and I'm sure I heard it somewhere before too as well. But you're the
mhm.
first person to tell me it on the show, and maybe that's. I mean, maybe there is both types of dog men. Maybe there's those who are in dog form 24/7 and they can't change back and forth, and maybe there's the type that can change, and that's where the lore of werewolves came from, was the ones who can change, because they would be the ones who would live normal lives during the day, and then once a month they would go hairy at night and go crazy.
Yeah.
But it's possible, I guess. And I mean, in a world where I fully believe that dogmen exist, because I've heard so many stories of them, that there's no way they don't exist. There's just no way. I mean, I've read so many encounters on the NADP website that like it's just, even if 90% of them are false, straight out lies, the 10% that are left are still terrifying enough to convince me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I see it. I mean, it's just, but I mean, and the Honey Island swamp monster though, I will say, I always thought that was a Bigfoot.
You know, it's in that vein. Who knows what it is, to be honest, because, I think at the same time, like the skunk ape down there in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. The stories around the Honey Island swamp monster, they remind me of, the Pope Lick monster up in Kentucky.
Yep.
It's it's got a similar backstory, like a circus came through town type thing. And, this creature got out, this sideshow creature got out. But I don't know. I've never seen the Honey Island swamp monster.
I mean,
But it definitely does give the Bigfoot vibes type for sure. Yeah.
I mean, well, the whole half alligator thing, I never heard that one though. That's kind of new to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's some wild stuff down there in the swamps. All right. I'm gonna be honest.
I'm sure. I mean, there are parts of those swamps that probably have never been explored in the last 100 years.
Sure.
I guarantee it. I mean, if you go deep enough, there's stuff that hasn't been explored, and who knows what backwards creatures could be living in there still that never even got found because even the colonials weren't crazy enough to venture that far in the swamps because the gators and everything else that can kill you, the snakes and everything else. Like, I mean, to civilize New Orleans before it became when Louisiana first became a colony, like that must have been one of the most dangerous jobs in the freaking world, to go down there and just deal with all these animals that want to kill you.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's a lot of the folks that went down there, there's those Cajun people down there, they are kind of stuck doing it, right? Because originally the people who colonized New Orleans and all, it was
French.
It was the military. It was the French military, and it was a lot of hunters and trappers, and that's really why they were there. It was meant to be, it was commerce, right? They weren't really trying to create a community. But man, when those Cajun people came down later, they were just looking for land, right? They had gotten kicked out of Canada, sent back from France over here to Louisiana, and they just get shoved out in the swamp, and they ain't never been in the swamp before. I can't imagine, what they put up with, and they created this culture, and there's a lot of folklore because of that. You ever heard of like Lafitte Filet? They're down there in the swamp as well, and that's kind of like a will-o'-the-wisp type.
Oh, okay.
I'm like,
thing, I know the name, but I can't picture what it is. Like, I know the name.
Yeah, it's just it's like a flame that shows up, and they talk about it's this kind of trickster you'll be out in the swamp and you'll see this kind of will-o'-the-wisp type thing, but don't look at it too hard because it'll trick you into following it, and you'll start following it, and you'll just follow it deeper and deeper into the swamp, and of course it's you're gonna get lost in the swamp and die, right?
Oh, you're gonna be gator food.
Yeah, gator food, exactly.
I mean, there's a reason they've been alive since the dinosaurs. You don't mess with a gator. I spent a lot enough time in Florida as a kid that you don't mess with a gator. Like, one comes up on the canal, you stay away from that part of the canal for a while. But it's just, I mean, the New Orleans back swamps are just so, like, if you want to make a man of yourself and truly prove you're tough, that's where you go, because there's nowhere in America that's tougher to deal with nature than there. Then maybe
those Cajun guys down there are certainly tough as nails for sure. Yeah.
Oh, they are. I mean, maybe Alaska, the last wilderness. Maybe that's just as bad. I don't know. Yeah. I've heard some stories about Bigfoots in Alaska that they like to kill humans. So, but yeah, I mean, but you said the Pope Lick monster.
Yeah.
The Pope Lick monster is a goat man
he's a goat man. Yeah, well, his backstory. So he's out of Louisville, Kentucky, right? His backstory is that as they're crossing the Pope Lick on the Pope Lick trestle up there in Louisville, there's this giant thunderstorm. Well, take it back a notch, right? Pope Lick monster, essentially, folks say that back in the 20s or the 30s or something, right? He was born, and as a baby, he comes out of his mama and he's got little hooves and horns, right? And his mom decides, well, I'm going to abandon him. I can't. This is a devilish creature, right? And of course, a carny, was it can't remember the gentleman's name, but a carnival, picks him up, right? Makes him a sideshow creature, right? They lock him up and everything. He grows up as a goat man. Well, one day as they're heading out of Louisville on the Poplick Trestle, a couple miles outside of Louisville, a giant storm happens. Lightning hits the train as they're going down. The train falls off the bridge right there in the Poplick. And sure enough, he gets his freedom. He kills, some of the folks there, and he continues to live underneath the Poplick Bridge. What he is, it's a goat man though. But the thing about the Poplick monster that's interesting is he's also supposedly a voice shifter, right? Like he can mimic voices. He's voice mimicry. So according to the legend, it's that the Poplick monster, he'll be up on the train trestle, right? And he'll mimic someone that you might know. So you'll come looking and you'll come out on the train tracks, and this train will, run you over essentially, right? And what's become so dangerous is that kids will do this, right? So when I actually went and visited Louisville and went there, there's a memorial down there from back in 2019. A young woman was killed on the train tracks up there.
I remember that. Yeah.
So it continues on. That one was back then. There was a couple of movie came out maybe about 20 years ago. And right after the movie came out, some kids were killed up there. Going up there and, so it's one of those things where it's almost this self-perpetuating myth of is this goat man there. But it'll be interesting in a few years if you go out there because civilization is expanding further and further out of Louisville. And the next thing you know, it's no longer, it's not really farmland anymore like it once was, because one of the theories was, of course, that a farmer had relations with one of his goats, of course, right?
Of course. Yeah, I've heard so many. I heard of a guy who worked in a goat farm and was a mad scientist and wanted to splice his body together with a goat, or he wanted to create like a goat-human hybrid, and basically a more PG version of the story you just were.
Yeah.
But it's just I've heard so many variations of the Poplick monster. I love the Poplick monster though. It's one of my favorite cryptids.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. There's a really cheesy documentary back in the day on it.
Yeah, and Monster Quest definitely had an episode on it. So did Monsters. Monsters and Mysteries in America. But yeah, Poplick. Right after Dogman and like a Sasquatch, like Poplick monster is like my third favorite cryptid. But down the south there though, you also got the Frogman. You got the Frogman. You got the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp.
There's a whole ton of different ones for sure.
The south is like the biggest area for different cryptids. In the north, it's either Bigfoot. It's a Bigfoot. Yeah, that's all it ever is a Bigfoot or a Dogman. There's no other like options really. But let me ask you this: what is the vibe with like UFOs and aliens down there? Is it 100%? Do people tend to believe?
Well, I don't cover a lot. I don't really cover UFOs. I don't normally do too much with UFOs just because I didn't really, I kind of stick to old ghost stories mostly. Yeah. But, it's interesting. It's still a part of it. I think if you're really going to get, obviously like Kentucky, has its UFO stories, right? And you got your the Hopkinsville ghosts or the Hopkinsville and everything.
Goblins,
yeah. And I think most of those are going to be over in Texas, to be honest. I think you get a lot more out there if you consider that the South or not. And so it's up to the Texas folks to decide.
Technically, I consider it the South because it's literally in the South, but. Yeah, Texans have their own mind and state of mind for everything. So,
yeah,
who knows there? But yeah, and you got the Hops. You said it, the Hopkinsville goblins that were out in Kentucky, and they did 2 documentaries on those.
Yeah, and Benny and Barney Hill were down here. Yeah, there's it's got it, but like I said, I don't cover a lot of. I don't really cover. Every now and then there'll be something like we just did an episode on the Brown Mountain Lights, right? Out in North Carolina, we kind of just, take a nod to the fact that, a lot of people talk about that could be, activity out there. And that's essentially, if you're not familiar with the right side of Nashville, Asheville, North Carolina, these Brown Mountain Lights, it's this light phenomenon that's out over the Brown Mountain Ridge. And, it kind of comes up at night, and people have been talking about it for over 100 years. There's things that were published back in the early 20th century, and nobody's really known exactly what it is. They've had scientists come out, all these different stories surround it. And sometime maybe in the 60s or the 70s, they of course started to discuss how we think that this phenomenon actually is extraterrestrial, that this is a national forest. It's protected land. Nobody's living out there. We think this is a place that's come. And it's even, it was an X-Files episode even, where some folks got, abducted from the Brown Mountain area. Yeah.
Funny you mentioned that. Well, listeners, now's a good time to tell you. I have just started a subscription through Spotify for this podcast, Paranormal Normal. And one of the gifts that my listeners are going to be getting is if you sign up for the subscription, which is only $2 a month, I want less than a cup of coffee at Dunk's, or way less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. You want to put it that way, but you can listen to all this new content we're going to be doing, including more brackets and an X-Files watch-along show I'm going to be doing. Because it's funny you said that, because I've been contemplating this for a few days, because I love the X-Files, and I've wanted to do like a watch-along series for it, but I didn't want to do my own podcast for it. So I'm going to do it as paid content for this show to try to increase my audience base and, try to pay my bills a little. But $2 a month, I don't think it's too much to ask. I ain't going to charge $5, $10 a month, because that's ridiculous. But I wouldn't do that for a podcast. I'll have people do it for me. But $2 a month, I've done that for podcasts. Derek Hayes, Monsters Among Us, who's been on the show. But
oh, cool, yeah.
But but that was just a good segue to throw that in there.
Yeah, man.
I haven't announced that yet, so I wanted to announce this isn't going to be released until March anyway. So by the time my listeners hear it, it'll already be out. But hopefully. But yeah, and Barney and Betty Hill happened in New Hampshire.
Oh man, I'm backwards here. Who am I thinking of in Mississippi? You see, I'm not a big UFO in that realm. Like I said, I'm mostly ghost stories,
Well, let me ask you this. What's your favorite ghost story to come out of the South?
Yeah. What's my favorite one?
What's your ghost story you love covering the most besides the Julia? Well, that's not a ghost story really, but what's your favorite? What's the ghost story that you loved covering the most and gave you the most thrill in doing?
What's wild is now that you're asking me that, I don't even know. I know so many of them. Gosh, I love the Bell Witch because it's just so complicated, and it's got just such a mess. It's such a mess of a story.
She was in our Urban Legends bracket too.
Yeah, she's definitely one of the ones. I actually have up behind me up there, I have a rock from the Bell Witch Cave that we stole from the cave. So if something bad happens on this podcast, my apologies.
I was gonna say, isn't that bad luck to steal something from the Bell Witch?
Total bad luck, but I did it anyway. And nothing bad's happened yet. I think, right now, the one that I'm investing the most time in at the moment is Lake Lanier. Supposedly it's cursed out there, in Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And there's a ghost story associated with that of a woman in blue. They had essentially two women. I don't know if you ever heard of Lake Lanier, but it's a man-made lake.
I've heard the name.
So it's a lake. So it's a story that's kind of been getting really big lately, and a lot of shows have been covering it and starting to talk about it more. But essentially, back in the 1950s, Atlanta's growing, and the way that Georgia was kind of dealing with a lot of their growing cities is they needed aqueducts, they needed water for these cities, and Atlanta is just getting larger and larger. And essentially, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and they dammed up the Chattahoochee River in order to make this immense lake right outside of Atlanta, right? And in order to do that, they had to purchase land, and they had to buy all this old farmland and put together this lake. And of course, in the process of them doing that, they had to move cemeteries, right? Because you have all these cemeteries down there in the land, and folks wanted all, this is sacred land. We got to move all those bodies. Supposedly they did not do that. Okay. They did not move all of these cemeteries. And this is the story. And of course, today, if you talk to anybody about Lake Lanier, they consider it is a haunted lake. It's cursed, a lot of basically, I think last year it was something like 14 people died on Lake Lanier last year. And they consider it a curse this way. And of course, there's a lot of other things have happened on that land underneath. This is old Cherokee land. There were burial mounds under there, which was sacred to the Cherokee people that are under the lake. There's a city called Oscarville down there. A lot of people claim that part of the curse has to do with Oscarville and what happened back in 1912 in Oscarville. There was actually a lynching down there. A couple of black men were accused of a crime. And they did not wait for a trial, and they were hung. And all of the black residents of Forsyth County were run out of town in 1912. And so a lot of folks say that might be part of the reason why Lake Lanier is cursed. And over the years, it's just like I said, it's a deadly lake. Over 700 people have died on Lake Lanier, and people claim that there's a woman wearing blue who will appear out on the lake, who will appear on this one bridge or in different spots on the lake. And it's the ghost of a woman whose car actually careened off of a bridge. These two women back in 1957. Delia Mae, Parker Young, and Susie Roberts. They were driving over a bridge and they came crashing off the bridge and nobody could find them. All right. And not too long later, a year later, one of the girls, actually a fisherman found her, about a year later, but they couldn't identify her at that point. All right. But she was wearing a blue dress and didn't have hands. Okay. And this was the image of the woman who was crossing the bridge there. So then in about 1990, they actually found the car and found Susie Roberts. She was down there at the bottom of the lake in the car for, I guess, what is that? Over 30 years or no, It's not quite 30 years, 20 something years. She was down there at the bottom of the lake. So folks claim to see these women still to this day. But I think that's one of those stories. Lake Lanier right now, the reason it interests me the most is a lot more people are starting to tell the story. Hadn't been around that long. And it gets a little more complicated, a little more complex. And, you'll probably start seeing it on some of these TV shows here in the near future. So,
probably. Yeah. I mean, they always are looking for the next cursed or haunted area that they can do shows on. But I mean, it's funny. That's kind of similar to the Bridgewater Triangle stories of, because like my wife originally lived on a house which is in the Bridgewater Triangle, and the house that she lived in, which was originally bought by her grandfather in 90, he was the second owner of it. The first owners left really fast for unknown reasons, but the house her grandfather later found out was built on Indian burial ground. And I swear to God, this house is like something out of freaking Poltergeist. And it's in the Bridgewater Triangle to begin with, which is a huge area for paranormal everything. But the freaking house is haunted to the nines with different things, Native American spirits, and possibly a Native American shaman, we believe. In my then girlfriend, now wife's room, she refused to turn off the lights at night, and I asked her why. One of the first nights I stayed there, like, why would you turn off the light? Like one of the lights. She's like, because if you turn off all the lights, you see this figure, the shadow on the ceiling, and you see 3 balls of light circling around in its hand. And I'm like, okay, leave the light on, please.
Yeah. That'll do it.
It will. And I mean, and I bought her a camera for her room to keep an eye on the kids and when she's not in there or whatever. And because she's always said like she thought she was abducted by aliens too, so I had a second motivation to buy the camera. But because ever since she was a kid, she believed she's been abducted by aliens because she would disappear in the middle of the night, and her sister would be looking for her and everything because they shared a room. And her sister couldn't find her anywhere in the house, and she was too young at that point to like leave the house and go do something. But the one morning she messaged me when I was at work, and she's like, I feel like I didn't sleep again last night. I wonder if something happened again. 10 minutes later, she looks at the camera footage from the night before. She lived in she had a second floor bedroom, and there's no way to get to the roof of outside her window easily. And there's this big, shadowy black figure. Like you could see it outside the window, walking towards the window, kind of, or coming towards the window. I don't know if it was walking, but coming towards the window. And then the camera goes staticky. Which right there to me says extraterrestrial, because what can interfere with technology? aliens can anytime they want, basically, because they are masters of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just that whole area is just rich, full of. It's a hot spot. It's one of the main triangles of the United States and of the world where paranormal activity is at the highest.
Yeah.
Just like the Bermuda Triangle, just like I'm trying to think if there's one down south, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. I know there's the Anse Borrego in California, the Alaskan Triangle. I feel like there's one down south somewhere. I just can't freaking think of it. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. That's what that made me think of, like that lake. But yeah, I mean, man, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that lake a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
But so let me ask you this: down south, is there much talk of lake or sea monsters?
You know, a couple places have them. Was it like Lake Norman out there, North Carolina? You know, what is it? You don't hear a lot though. The Altamaha, isn't that what it is out in Georgia?
Sounds familiar.
Nah, there's not really a lot. You know, most of the lakes around here are man-made. You know, out here in Georgia and Tennessee and all. You know, it's a lot of dammed up rivers.
I mean, man-made lakes don't always necessitate that there's not a legend about a monster living in it.
Right. Well, you know, even Lake Lanier itself, you know, supposedly has these giant catfish down there, right? So if you go, it's really eerie when you visit because, like I said, it was a dammed up river, it's Chattahoochee River, and they dammed it up. And if you go by it and you walk out right to the dam right there and you look, you know, it's kind of pool over on the side here. This just kind of calm, peaceful lake. And you don't realize that this lake is actually what you're standing on the cusp of is something that's deeper than as tall as the Statue of Liberty. And it just drops right down because it's this dammed up pool right here. And supposedly, you know, about 20 or 30 years ago, they had to have divers go down there to service the dam, some of the gates. And these divers came back up and said, "We're out of here, man. We saw catfish down there that are as big as a Volkswagen." You know, so, you know, you hear stories like that. No, I tell you, there's big catfish in this down here anyway. But, you know, folks have talked about that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, I was going to ask you, like, have they ever actually had someone go down there and, like, scuba dive this lake to, like, see how deep it really goes and, like, what's at the bottom?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there have been people. It's got a little ghost town under there. You know, there's still some structures that never really got moved out. You know, they flooded a place where people were living. So there's a lot of, there's still some stuff down there. There's still, you know, you can still go down there and see some old headstones, some cemeteries and stuff. You know, some things of that nature. But it's a pretty murky lake, though. It's kind of hard to see, I imagine.
Yeah, there's a town in New York that the same thing happened to. Yeah. In Sullivan County, New York, where I went to college, there's I forget the name of it, but there's a town and like there's a bridge that goes over it now where they flooded. Same story. They flooded to make a lake to make a lake basically, and now there's a town underneath there. And on a nice summer day, if you go stand by the bridge, you can see a church underneath the water still.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still definitely. I know back in the I want to say it was 2008, the water level went super low, and you could still see there's an old Speedway grandstand that kind of started poking out of the water down there.
So, yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy that they just drown towns basically, like.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of this land, it was you know, it was farmland, it was bottomland. You know, they purchased as much. I mean, they purchased the land from people. Of course, it wasn't really the best prices or anything that they were purchasing the land. And a lot of people picked up their farms and barns and, you know, took the wood with them, things like that. You know, some historic sites were moved off there. There's like an old tavern that got moved. That was part of the Cherokee Nation. They moved that, you know, so they did a certain amount, but I mean, it was impossible to do everything.
Oh yeah,
sure.
I mean,
you know,
and you're not gonna pick up a stone church and try to move it. Like that's
right.
just not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, but these weren't exactly like bustling communities. You know, these were small little farm communities, really.
Yeah, I mean, well, same thing where I went to college. It was like a farm community. It's actually up in the Catskills, kind of where like all the old Jewish comedians like and Frank Sinatra and all that used to perform back in the 40s and 50s, like in the summer country clubs. That's where it was. Like, it's a cool little area and it's right up by where Woodstock took place.
Oh, it's interesting.
Oh yeah, we went to Bethel Woods where Woodstock took place, and we spent a night there having some fun with certain substances. But you have to relive the memories, you know. But would have paid to see Hendrix perform there. But yeah, so basically, why don't you tell listeners where they can find your podcast, where they can find you? Just sell yourself, basically.
Well, I mean, Southern Gothic, it's on all the podcast platforms. You know, you can get on Apple, Spotify. We're on YouTube as well. You can get us on there, or you can visit southerngothicmedia.com. It's our website, and you can listen to some episodes there, and find out more. You can also, we're on Instagram and Facebook and the whole deal, and you'll be doing that. And you said this will be out in March here, so it'll be past. But this summer, we'll be doing a show out at the Haunted America Conference out in Alton, Illinois, that Troy Taylor puts on. We'll be doing the show before the convention starts the night before. I'll be telling ghost stories with going on. That is in, my apologies, I want to say it was June 22nd, Thursday, June 22nd. We'll be doing that. So you can go to ghostconference.net and you can buy tickets to that. It'll be a blast. Yeah.
Sounds good. And of course, the link to your page will be on the description of this episode as well. So people can just click and go.
Awesome.
And find you guys. Well, it's you and your wife, if I'm not mistaken, right?
My sister does it with me.
Your sister. Okay. See, I saw the same last name. I didn't want to,
No.
I kind of assumed.
We were bred weirdos. Like I said, we both got drugged to the same cemeteries and libraries down in New Orleans. So it's a family affair for sure.
Oh, that's cool though. I wish my brother and me could do a podcast together, but we literally like none of the same stuff. So, but
yeah.
But well, thank you, Brandon, for coming on. It's been an amazing episode, and it's been fun just talking the South. I never get to talk about the South because most of my guests are not from the South. But I don't know why, but that's just the way it works. I mean, a lot of them are from the West or Northeast, but thank you for coming on. It's been a great episode, and we'll have to talk about getting you my music podcast, possibly.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, Jerry. I appreciate it for sure.
My pleasure. And to all my listeners, you can find me on Facebook as Paranormal the New Normal / Maniacal Music Musings Podcast with the S Facebook group. You can find me on Twitter and the Gram as @JuggaloBastard. You can find me on TikTok as @JuggaloBastard Podcast, and you can find me on YouTube just by searching Paranormal the New Normal. And I want to thank my listeners. I'll be back in half a week with another episode. And to all my viewers, thank you. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. And that'll do it for tonight. Thank you all for listening and watching. It's been a fun show. And thank you again, Brandon. It's been fun.
Thanks, Sharon.